It's just a call.
Okay, thank you.
All right, guys. Getting to the agenda right now. First of all, any comments or questions about the action minutes that went up from our last meeting? All right.
Mark, quick question from me. You provided the meetings from meeting number 2. Is that correct? We're on meeting number 4 right now. Are we still working through one set of minutes, or what's up?
Meeting minutes from number 3. They're approved. I could send those out. I didn't realize I hadn't sent those out, so yeah. I can send those out during this meeting, actually.
Okay. Go ahead and do that. If we have any time, we can circle back to this as well. Thanks.
Okay. And then, so we'll move into our. Should we continue to discuss our the Rancho Navarro, or is that something that we're going to have to do sidebar on because we don't want it to take us off course on the other?
I think we need to do that on the sidebar because I know that we want to spend a lot of time doing custom regulations until we have a chance to at least talk with Kate, and Kate will be available to start helping us beginning of next week. So,
okay.
Is that for you, Kirk? Cook is the attorney with Myers Navi, and she is the legal counsel on cannabis regulations that we brought on as part of our team. And she'll be working with Matt, the assistant county counsel, on these matters.
Okay, and earlier this week we sent out draft framework regulations for what the opt-out overlay zone, the ordinance that for the opt-out overlay zone or amendments to the ordinance that'll create it. You guys did have some comments on that, so we wanted to go through those, and we specifically wanted to go through them with, how they, what's your concerns as they relate to specific areas that you're working on right now. The way we're going about this is we have these 3 areas picked out that we believe are going to be good candidates for an inclusion into an opt-out overlay zone. We will determine what the commonalities are between these 3 areas, what needs to be addressed, and how we can best implement this. And then we go over. Once we've figured out what those overarching characteristics are, then we can backtrack and say, well, let's use that to create a framework for other communities in the future to try to, if they are interested, to be able to add themselves or create an opt-out area, overlay area for their community or neighborhood. So what about how, Evan, I think you're Deerwood. Any comments to Deerwood concerns or?
Benny will. It's the Upper Deerwood neighborhood. Some that have not had construction on it yet, but the whole area is considered a neighborhood. The reference to residential under purpose, we think it would be more appropriate. Something's going crazy. We think it might be more appropriate to change that to neighborhood. One of McCowan's emails discusses opt-out and overlays and stuff like that as neighborhoods or communities, and I think that would be a better description for a wider range of uses of land.
you'd like to see the text in the in works say neighborhood?
I think for purpose, I think it makes the specific areas that prohibit the operations of commercial cannabis businesses are is a neighborhood and historically been the location of cannabis cultivation. And like I said, there in our area there are some parcels that have not been developed yet, but every surrounding some of those parcels is for and view ourselves as a neighborhood. So I think that if you use the word residential in that purpose, maybe limiting the scope when you could have somebody that is doing something that is not truly a residential high density area. Still want to participate. That any sense? I hope it does.
No, let me wait a little bit here. I get the concern. Let's not take this down to the individual parcel level, though. What we're going to do is describe a general area. Would you be how something like a community that is generally residential in character? We're not concerned about every parcel being developed, but we are, we're not taking long developed areas off the table, so I don't know why that would ever be requested, but not only residential in character. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for the suggestion, Paul.
Okay.
Is there something else that we have? Yes.
Paul, Aaron, just kind of clarify on that. Residential in character. I'm a little worried about the same area as I put in notes, just because we have Ag 40 parcels in our area, which are primarily used for ag at this point. They do not outweigh the residential or neighborhood, and they're all part of that contiguous neighborhood. But the definitions and the defensibility of that, I don't know. It's a little.
Well, okay. One, I threw something out that was a little bit flat. How about you give us? We go a little bit further than community or neighborhood. But the idea is that these places where people live, and that's why they're sensitive. So we get that across without, box ourselves in unintentionally.
Right. We thought neighborhood or community or bordered by neighborhood or community, something along those lines. I don't know. I think it's a little problematic.
Okay, we'll work through it and get it smoothed out.
One thing I wanted to note on that purpose, after where it described residential, it talks about that have historically been the location of cultivation. I would put the same language as above, where we talk about commercial cannabis businesses or operations.
Got it.
Paragraph, do we want to go through all the comments that I made, Paul, or is that helpful or not helpful?
I jumped into the document on the server because I didn't see I didn't quite get to the document fast enough. So, who did the email come from with the comments I should be looking at?
That was Aaron.
Okay, let me. This is the couple of minor edits framework.
Yes.
Got it. Got it now. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so we're in the purpose paragraph. So that paragraph talking about implement specific standards for, to me that was maybe opt-in language, perhaps. Limits as a reason for that. It seemed like it might have been out of place, but I don't know.
Good.
Okay. I'll move on down. We got, Mike, oh, go ahead.
Policy document.
He's leaving the document. He's leaving the document. So I'll skip the corrections and all that type of stuff. Down to establishment of commercial cannabis prohibition over districts. It's a percentage required. That was one thing we just wanted to highlight. We're not sure what should be used. Is the appropriate percentage? Is it not? Are we maintaining the character versus trying to change the character of neighborhood? Is reflected in the percentage required? It was a question mark because I don't think we have the answer.
What if I need to base something?
So I've got to, dig a little deeper here because we had a good conversation with the opt-in folks this morning about this very subject. I spent a fair amount of time talking about whether the appropriate way to gain community input is a petition on the front end, a ballot or vote as the item is coming up for final decision, or maybe neither. And what I'll share is, first of all, we would like to keep both opt-in procedures and the opt-out procedures similar, if possible. We may ultimately find good reasons to have different processes, but if we can make the processes for these two types of overlays the same, then we think that'll avoid confusion on implementing. So the question that we'll get to in a moment is, you guys think about a petition versus a vote versus something else. With regard to this, we threw out 60% because honestly, to change the land use rights with a group of properties, it does feel like it should be more than the barest of majorities. And so that's why we threw out the 60%.
To counter that, the whole cannabis thing is changing the land use as it traditionally has been. I agree with you when it comes to the process can be the same between opt-in and opt-out. I think that a lower standard for maintaining the status quo would be appropriate on opt-in and out, and a higher standard on opting in.
Okay, I'm going to be devil's advocate because I know you guys are looking at the condition of the land, but this quo right now is property owners have rights, and we're taking rights away from them. I understand that you're pointing out correctly that the landscape is changing because of these laws, but the current law of the land. So,
we mentioned that this for communities and neighborhoods going forward, that the standards of a method by joining the opt-out overlay or having an opt-out overlay, they apply to Deerwood, Woody Glen, and possibly Rancho Navarro. Your community, your neighborhoods will come through this process right now.
There won't be any petition or ballot or whatever on these first three. They're just getting moved through.
Right, good.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. And
Okay, Paul, I saw that you put in 60%. I was completely comfortable with that. So that it seems totally reasonable to me.
It doesn't feel like a high bar, and sometimes we see standards that require 2/3 or even higher, and it becomes very difficult. But 60%, a little bit more than half. And the assumption is that these districts will be formed around groups of properties that are probably more than 60% supportive. So. Go ahead.
This is Kirk. I just have one got correctly that for 3 subdivisions here that representing there's the the decision process won't happen. We're going with that on A, the direction board supervisors, so there won't be any voting necessary for our three subdivisions. Is that correct?
Well, we're already past the petition point, right? We're considering, so you would never have got to this point without a petition if in fact it was required, because we're well out of the gates and crafting a proposal. There won't be time to do any type of ballot within the schedule that the Board of Supervisors has set. So my understanding is the board will have to consider these 3 opt-outs and the 4 opt-ins that are being proposed on their merits. They'll comment, but they're going to have to make a decision on these because there simply won't be time to do any ballot. That's what it's like to me, but I could be surprised, but
what that could happen too. So this proposed amendment to this will go up and read it, and while in while the meeting, while being considered, it can be amended for people. And if there's a really vocal opposition to one of these communities or neighborhoods not being for them, they're saying they don't want to be included in an opt-out overlay. It's just because we're writing it in as an amendment to the ordinance doesn't mean that it's going to be accepted, and it's not an all or nothing proposal either. The proposal draft ordinance, that amendment that we bring forward, could be amended to exclude one of these areas.
That disclaimer that staff has to always offer is, we're going to run this up the flagpole, but eventually there will be action by the Board of Supervisors that we can't promise it will go one direction or the other.
Okay. Fair enough. Kirk, does that sit, this is Aaron. Kirk, does that sit well with you based on your situation at Navarro?
Well, it just depends on, what level of public hearings there are, because if there's some kind of hearing in front of the board, then, everybody in my community can show up.
Sure enough.
Well, we've also stated repeatedly that won't be an opt-in or an opt-out district established without having a town hall meeting in the neighborhood. So there will be the hearings, but we're also going to come out to Rancho Navarro and have a meeting. And we'll report that we heard strong support or strong opposition or whatever the community says. That will just become part of the record.
And when you say we're coming out, is that just Michael Baker International or anybody from the county?
There'll be a county staff member or two that would want to attend, but it's part of our obligation to some meetings in the community.
Okay, fair enough. Should we keep moving down the document?
Yeah.
For establishment of a CCP District A, I highlighted residential for the same reasons we talked about up above, so we can think about what the best language is there.
Apologies, I'm backtracking a little bit. Are you guys okay with the 60%?
Yes.
That works? Okay. All right.
Okay. I had a note about definable community neighborhood. We talked about that as well, so that's part of that same question. Just a typo, let's see. What we talked about is review of commercial cannabis prohibition overlay district. Now a little bit into prior to approval of CCP district, following things must be affirmed. Letter A, required to preserve the health and welfare of the community. Again, we're thinking in terms of defensibility. Maybe we're overthinking it. It's entirely possible, but it determines and affirms the that required to preserve the health and welfare. Do we need to even worry about this, or is this just, makes sense, but I'm just thinking in terms of if I'm an attorney.
This statement, health and welfare, is foundational to the county's land use authority. It's very common in approval of a use permit, approval of variance. It's the standard of health and welfare is certainly open to interpretation, but this is really what we're talking about. And if a good case can't be made, a convincing case can't be made that's in the interest of the health and welfare of the community, then really ought to be rethinking whether it's an appropriate overlay zone. So I really do need some findings of, these are what we call findings of facts, that the board affirms, the planning commission and the board affirm that these circumstances apply. This is the yardstick for saying, yes, this is appropriate or not, and we are interested in your help. If we're leaning away from having a ballot of affected property owners, then, we really should have findings in here, and we'll work on these. We're really ahead of the game that we're down to working on findings at this point, because this is really drafting the ordinance and beyond the framework that we've agreed to have turned out pretty quickly. But we will, before this is done, have findings that the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors will make in this determination.
Okay, thank you for that, Paul.
Okay.
Moving on down the list, it seems like the areas that we just had the most questions on were the ones that needed to be fleshed out. Of some previously permitted operations, amending a commercial operation by district, and those items down below. So, just flesh those out.
So the question on previously permitted, we've already talked about this, that previously permitted uses would not be stopped mid-season, but then would not be able to replant the following season. We came to that point, I think, in our discussions previously, if I'm not mistaken. You understand that there's a winding down of folks who are out there, and particularly with these regulations taking effect probably late summer, this growing season will be allowed to complete, but then next growing season, expectation is you will have people replanting.
So did we define growing season, or do we want to go a calendar year? What's the most reasonable, Paul?
Year probably works pretty well, because we can get into an indoor growing season. There's no such thing. So calendar year happens to coincide nicely with all harvest is completed, probably anything related to the cannabis product is done. It's a time to say, okay, you're wrapped. So I think the calendar year probably makes sense. So it would be essentially uses within an opt-out zone shall not continue past the end of the calendar year following adoption and establishment of the overlay, or something like that. The language will get full or complete.
We're going to agonize over this a little bit more, but can you just spit that out one more time, please?
Well, let's just get the deal points, if you will, that following adoption of an opt-out, cannabis uses may continue until the end of the current calendar year, but not continue beyond the end of the calendar year. That's what I think we're saying. Yeah. Is that what you guys are expecting?
Yes.
Okay.
The only asterisk point is, how do we establish what is an approved current operation, cannabis operation? Do we? Is it back 1/16 prior cultivation date for the cannabis?
Well, I'm we're going to have to dig a little bit more here and make sure with Kate that we're on solid ground. If someone's now I know that sunset provisions apply to your affected communities, but if somebody has a permit that says the county's granted them the right to continue cultivating until 2020, we're going to have to take a look how that use sunsets. Anything other than that, if it's just an existing cultivation route and a permit from the, then that seems pretty straightforward that use would end at the end of the year. I think it's a little bit of question how to deal with if there are in fact any permitted commercial activities within any of your neighborhoods, and I'm not sure that we've actually identified any of those, have we?
No.
Not that we know of, but we haven't been told directly by ag.
There aren't.
Yeah. So, we'll have to take on uses possibly a little bit differently than just existing, but I don't think existing would result in any vested right to continue. Permitted use has a different standing, and so we'll have to talk with Kate and make sure we know how we would sunset that type of use. But it's just existing. It's not. It doesn't matter that cultivation was occurring if it wasn't for a permit. I don't think so.
What, Paul, not to belabor this, but what about for those that have been applied for but not granted? Things for wait for dates.
Applied for but permit not granted, it's the same as just a use. It really, to me, the obvious change happens when the county issues a permit. So I don't think applied for permit really matters much. I think still just, it's an existing use, but it will not now continue on. I would assume that once the county establishes an opt-out zone, it would stop issuance of any further permits. I can't imagine that. First, we talked about, can we stop processing permits now? And we really agreed that no, we can't do that. But if there's any permits in process, when opt-out overlay is established, I would assume those permits are done. We stop processing those. They don't continue forward. That'll be a good question to ask Kate as well, Mark, if we can make sure to, you know, that's those permits in process. But I wouldn't think they would have any special rules just for having been processed when the regulations changed.
And the same thing about transfers if they haven't been approved either, which is part of this transference of prior growing cultivation thing that the county is mired in. So just a recommendation on our side, these questions will come up once this opt-out goes forward, at least at Woody Glen. I know that for a fact.
Okay. Do you guys and dear Woody Glen, you know, through talking to people, and I know you've said this before, but you really have no concept of how many permits are up there. Is that correct?
In Deerwood, we think that there are any permits.
As I said at the last meeting, as of 30 prior to that, that was the information from the planning department that there were no permits granted in anywhere near the Deerwood area, the off zone or
Woody Glen, there's one that's been applied for. The status of it is unknown at this point. We can't get confirmation. There's a pending criminal action, et cetera, which is maybe part of the reason that they haven't given us a status update. So there is one that's this that will be interesting.
And we know your situation, Rancho Navarro. Sorry, Paul.
No, great conversation.
I know more than I do.
All right. I think we're on to the outline. Ending a commercial cannabis prohibition overlay. question here, and we really don't have an answer, but we're going to need a process. It's going to be either amending is essentially the same process as establishing, you through all the same steps, or it might be an expedited process to make amendments. I don't know if you guys want to weigh in for the reasons to go one way or the other.
Amending in the opt-out side, the addition of more properties.
Well, amending could be the elimination. So an amending could be removing the overlay restrictions from a property. Somebody wants to get out of the overlay, or somebody wants to get in.
Yeah, my opinion on the amendment for somebody themselves from the opt-out is that you got islands and logical. You were talking about definable boundaries and stuff like that. We're talking about traffic and other things, and it would seem to me that an amendment, somebody wanting to back out of an opt-out, it should not induce the reasons for requesting the opt-out into the opt-out area. For instance, if it's the last parcel deep on the only road in and out, if you allow them to opt out of the opt-out, or removals from the opt-out, then are creating all of the negative aspects that were desired by the people who were requesting to be an opt-out area. There has to be some provision there that it can't use the negatives back into an opt-out area.
Generally, I would like to think that the process for either expanding the opt-out or contracting the opt-out is the same. And if that means that we don't make it very easy to take a property out of this restriction and to open it up, then we probably should attach the same level of care to adding new properties in. That there's a good reason that they added in, or being excluded, there's a good reason that they're being pulled out. So that just firmed up the durability of zone, but it probably goes both ways. I think we want to make it super easy to grow these opt-outs, make it super hard for reducing them. Make sense?
Yeah, makes sense. The other thing that I had discussions about is a period of time that has to pass before challenges or rearrangement to the amendment or amending an area place. If you create an opt-out area and 6 months later or a year later you begin amending it, then it could have an effect on property values and other things. It would be nice to have a block of time before the amendment process could begin.
And the challenge there is, what is the appropriate block of time?
Well, I think that in theory, somebody could challenge the opt-out area in general, the whole thing, and their signatures and stuff like that. If somebody comes into an area and buys a piece of property, wants to raise family in an environment that doesn't have the aspects of commercial cannabis cultivation, they reasonably assured that things are going to remain stable. We talk about the time and felt that a 10-year period maintaining the status quo of an opt-out area would be reasonable, and then after that it could be rearranged or amended. Would allow a stable environment for a long enough period that people making decisions about where they want to live and where they want to raise their children and whether they want to be dealing with the aspects of cannabis or from the commercial aspects of cannabis, be able to have the faith and that things were not going to change in a period of time.
10 years, is that the number the group wants to propose for consideration?
I would certainly propose 10 years as a minimum of, stability for the amendment.
Yeah. The other thing is that after the 10-year point, the group does not have to, or the area does not have to reconfirm that they want to continue to be opted out, but that would be the starting point for somebody who wants to change something. So the opt-out status would remain in place until somebody decided that they wanted to make changes.
So, Paul, I don't know how long, maybe you've owned a home, but when people buy homes, they're really a long-range proposition. Like we've owned a house for 30 years. I think there's a breaking point under 5 years where you're going to lose money if you try to have to sell it or something like that. So it's a long-term, buying a home is a long-term proposition, and these are, as noted, these are primary residential neighborhoods. So that would be, one of my arguments for beginning with a tier minimum to leave it alone.
We'd be happy with 10 years.
We'll go 10 years. I feel fairly confident that there will be pushback against that, but we've got to put a number out there, and that's a fine place to start discussion. But it is the only other thing like this on that horizon that I'm aware of is Williamson Act, which is a statewide program to preserve agriculture. So, it may be that there are similarities in the assurance of a certain environment, but that's about the only where I can think of that this type of restriction has been applied.
Length of time.
Yeah, in effect, we're creating a Williamson Act situation, but it involves the residential environment.
Yeah, so this is a neighborhood preservation,
Yeah, we'll certainly debate that number, but I think some assurance and some period of stability makes sense. One thing I would point out is that if a period of stability is established and people are choosing to move into that neighborhood, you will just see really more a reinforcing community value over time. So nobody will be able to come in and buy a piece of property and convince 90% of the people to change their mind. So.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Okay.
So we have a provision about the effects of leaving the opt-out should not adversely affect the remaining neighborhood. We want a provision about the before an opt-out can be reconsidered. Both sense.
Good.
And the provision will also, I guess somebody who's adjacent to an opt-out area who will opt in, would that be included in the same language?
That's the rub. Is I don't want to say no can join your opt-in or your opt-out zone for 10 years, but that's that double-edged sword that we'll have to determine if those really should be linked like that. But
Paul, does it necessarily have to be exclusive or the same process for each? I mean, it would seem to me that, back to Will's original point, at one point about preserving the nature of the character and the culture of the neighborhood, if someone would like to join into that, to me it says it should be an easier process than waiting years. But I don't know, maybe I'm trying things more complicated and it doesn't work in a planning setting.
Well, let's work internally a little bit, both with Kate Cook and with county staff, and determine whether there isn't something fundamentally different about growing an opt-out zone as compared to reducing and pulling back an opt-out zone. We'll get back with you, but at some point we will need to acknowledge that there's going to be some political pressures and some pushback. So we want to be careful that we don't start to appear too biased in one direction or the other. So
I agree that I think we talked about this before we got on the phone with you. We were very reasonable about what we're asking for, so it meets as little challenge as possible. That being said, there will be challenges just by nature, we believe, regardless of how reasonable we are. But we'll refer to your reasonability standard by all means.
okay, we're all on the same page there. We really got into, in the last couple minutes, this next conversation of repeal of an overlay district, and I think we understand that you would be looking for that same standard of, cannot be repealed for 10 years, and then we'll also, I guess, have to, and I work with Kate on this one a little bit, because we'll probably want to have more about the process for repeal, and what would the test for repealing be. So.
And you may, go ahead. Paul, you may have other language available to you on those issues from other planning processes.
Yeah, not applicable to cannabis, but these are things that are very common in planning and zoning law. So we'd have to create this anew.
Before we leave the draft framework, there's a couple things that came up at this morning's conversation with the opt-in folks that I think maybe we want to touch on, Paul, but not a great length. But there was this question about the definition of commercial cannabis cultivation, and that commercial cannabis cultivation should not and does not necessarily equal existing cannabis cultivation. In the case for opt-out, this draft framework that we created, we're saying exactly what we mean when we say commercial cannabis cultivation. Anyone that is cultivating cannabis for anything greater than personal use. Anything else we want to say about that, Paul?
What it was interesting is the conversation Mark's referring to was much like what we talked about here in residential, except from the opt-in perspective, it was, well, people were growing for medicinal purposes 25 plants. That's not really commercial, but it's cannabis cultivation, and how does that fit? Because that's how people really are using the land. In this case, I agree. We want to, as much as possible, link ourselves to commercial cultivation and not get mired in somebody was growing some plants for medicinal purposes and therefore has a right to continue. I think it's cleaner because it's much easier to track permits than it is somewhat documented or undocumented personal use cultivation. So I think it's much more straightforward here to just the focus on commercial. And I do know, of course, that this doesn't affect the ability to grow for personal consumption. It doesn't have any effect on that. So any of your neighbors can still grow their 6 plants outdoors. So it does not prohibit that.
Okay, well, I think from my perspective, it's either commercial or it's recreational / medical caregiver, whatever the other category is the state allows. Anything in between is not legal. It fits one of those two criteria. So we don't want to write an ordinance or an overlay opt-out language to deal with all the things that could be in between, in my opinion.
Agreed. And then the next thing that we did this morning that I think we'd like to do with you guys as well. So when we're talking about future additions to or future communities and neighborhoods that would like to create an opt-out overlay zone, we asked very simple, what the other question of the group for the opt-in folks, and so we want to ask you, the opt-out folks, would you rather see a petition to find an opt-out overlay zone or a ballot measure? And Paul might be able to explain a little bit clearer if you guys want to know, or we could just go around the room real quick and tell us, say, petition or ballot.
Well, it would be a long, exhaustive process, wouldn't it?
Agencies do ballot measures for lots of little reasons, and you never hear about it. An assessment district, an annexation, something that only affects a group of property owners, it's actually not terribly onerous. It is a little bit more time and a little bit more work, but it's not a matter of wait until November 2018. It's not even a matter of people have to go down somewhere to vote. So usually what would happen is the ballots would be mailed out, and then some portion of those ballots would be returned, and it's the people who return their ballots that their votes would be counted.
And I think one of the really big differences to note is the ballot measure will come at the end of the decision, whether or not this community or neighborhood will be within an opt-out overlay zone, whereas the petition would be the community will go around support to join the opt-out overlay zone, take that as part of an application to staff. They'd put together a staff report, go in front of the Board of Supervisors, have a public meeting, and then they'd be, then they would implement the opt-out zone. Whereas in the ballot model of this, the staff would begin to initiate all of this. It would go to the board. Oh, actually, I'm a little bit unclear on how that would work, Paul.
We don't know, because in the ballot measure, it could be advisory or essentially binding, meaning that the people may be voting and saying, board, please do this, or that people may be with the decision. And it could be structured either way. I honestly doubt whether the board would allow the final decision to be made ballot, although, there would be good reasons to do it. I don't think the board is looking forward to having to wade into a community where a fair amount of the people want things one way and a fair amount want the other, and being forced to make a decision. Bradenton-Navarro might ultimately be one of those challenging communities that's close split, and the board, they hate to give one group what they want at the expense of another group. So, but that's kind of a long departure. The answer is the ballot measure would come late. It could be advisory, or it could be somewhat more binding, and we would have to get direction from the board on what they want.
When we sent you our original draft of how we thought things might lay out, we kind of created a question setup. You're talking about petition or ballot, not necessarily have only petitions or have to have only ballots. We thought that starting with a petition to show interest, and if the interest is overwhelming, then there would not need to be a ballot. If the petition doesn't meet a certain threshold, let's say you don't get 60% of all of the people the petition, well then there'd be a need for a ballot. The things that we thought about or discussed was the possibility of the ballot is a secret document, so those who are concerned about privacy or intimidation would be able to fill out a ballot and remain anonymous. So I think initially in the Deerwood area and probably the Woody Glen area, I think a petition would probably be sufficient. But maybe other areas in the future where you have enough to indicate to the county that there is a strong interest to proceed yet not an overwhelming commitment to meet the threshold to move forward where a ballot. At the point, I guess that those people could request a ballot from the county, that the area be balloted.
So the suggestion is it doesn't have to be one or the other. We can run that the process of first getting a petition and then running a ballot does make this a pretty complex and for something that relatively straightforward. I wouldn't have necessarily anticipated doing both a ballot and a petition to qualify and a ballot.
We recently had a countywide ballot measure, and basically the line is, land use planning by initiative is not such a good idea. We believe that to go through normal, regular planning process, order.
I said, petition is pretty straightforward, and it does get right to it and complete. I think that ballot might be used if citizens want to appeal and be to the expense of having the ballot, possibly.
Let's think about this a little bit more. We'll let you guys think about it. I think that a petition is an interesting tool in that it forces you as advocates of something to go out into your community and talk with your neighbors and secure a level of support through signature for something that will change the regulations in your community. It does two things. It first of all proves to the county that there is a majority of people in support of this action, and it's worthy of consideration. It's also a great opportunity for residents of the community to get a dialogue going and see if, in fact, their personal views are shared by the majority of their residents. If so, it really helps to pave the way towards a smoother decision at the Board of Supervisor level. So there's a number of reasons that I kind of like through the petition process. I'm going to caution you about, if a decision is made to establish an overlay and a group wants to appeal it, I think probably it's challenging. There's no appeal to a board decision. The only action from a board decision is to sue. So there is no appeal.
So we have nodding heads with your thoughts there.
Can we do the formal poll here for petition? We haven't heard from Kurt.
I support the petition concept.
So 4 votes for petition.
You do understand that you would need to get out and get signatures representing the majority of the parcels, parcels. So this isn't 60% of the people who sign the petition. It's you need to go out and get 60% of your members to sign on.
Right.
Agreed.
Great.
Or just to clarify, parcel owners being defined as individual parcels, even if we have a similar ownership of multiple parcels.
Correct.
Okay.
But it also wouldn't be 2 signatures, husband and wife, from the same parcel.
Right.
It would be
Correct.
one signature, one parcel. If you own 10 parcels, you can essentially sign 10 times.
Agreed. Okay, thank you.
All right. So we're back to the agenda. And, we had some discussion about the implementation. I think we just covered that. Now, the next thing on the agenda, and I don't know that we've had time, it's discussion of opt-out overlay areas that retain partial criminal cannabis rights. Of course, this is our discussion in Rancho Navarro. Paul, Kurt, how do we approach this right now?
Kurt, what do you think?
Well, I'm kind of looking for some directions from you guys. It seems to me now that they're for Rancho Navarro specifically, not necessarily, in the general overlay process, but for Navarro specifically, there's not going to be a voting process. There's going to be some community meetings and then a supervisor's meeting. So, I'm not sure what what you're seeing here. You're talking Rancho Navarro specifically, talking about other communities that it would apply to.
The question here, I think, is whether there is such a thing as a partial opt-out, or whether Rancho Navarro just runs like Woody Glen, and it's a no cannabis cultivation after such and such date, no commercial cannabis cultivation after such and such date, or is there a more nuanced solution for Rancho Navarro? I think, Mark, isn't that still where we're at?
Yeah, correct.
This wraps up. It brings in a fair amount of complexity with what we've talked about. I think maybe, Mark, it might be best if we bring this up with Kate as we talked about before the call got started. There is some legal question, a little bit of legal sensitivity of should we be creating opt-out zones that have very different restrictions or not, and I'd like to explore that a little bit, and that might help guide us in one direction or another as far as whether each opt-out zone is identical in its restrictions.
What we haven't talked about, Kurt, yet is, so we have the Rancho Navarro neighborhood is well defined, and it's very easy to draw a line around it. And there wasn't this concern about existing cultivators. It'd be very easy to find that as an opt-out overlay zone. If possible, both Kirk and Paul to that neighborhood in any way that would eliminate current cultivators and kind of wrap in the people that want to have an opt-out zone. I think of it as kind of being shaped like an almond. Could we split that almond in two and solve both problems? Or do we stand to violate what we're saying our standards for the creation of an opt-out zone are in the first place?
I think you could do that, in a geographic sense, because there's just a sprinkling of everywhere. But this brings into that. I'm battling with the question of we're only concerned with commercial operations in the sense of those that are permitted, and the county's only permitted 40 operations so far. So I don't think any of those are in Rancho Navarro.
Well, we have a specific concern too. So as we mentioned, when we go forward with these, with this amendment to the zoning ordinance, it will be a public meeting, and and we will have done the public outreach prior to, and people in your community will know that this is coming. And if there's if the community support for it just isn't there, it won't happen. It not only would it not happen, but it could serve to stir up the water enough in that community where nothing could ever happen. It could really complicate things for a long time there. So we could. It sounds like there's a possibility that if we were to move forward with with opt-out for all of Rancho Navarro, we could have significant, opposition there and go down that path of getting into a pretty messy situation. We also I've also heard that there's a possibility that there is going to be full support, so even if you have people that aren't permitted, you have non-permitted uses occurring there, those people can still show up to this hearing and, like I just said, muddy the waters.
Yeah, I mean, I've been trying to call my neighborhood and community and say, hey, we need to get together and come up with a kind of a limited commercial strategy or game plan that we agree upon and find some middle ground. But it sounds like it's probably not going to be, something that's going to fit into this opt-out overlay process right now. Like you said, it's all or nothing right now. Is how I understand it.
The opt-out, as we're applying it to Deerwood and to Woody Glen, is a complete prohibition of commercial cannabis activity. There won't be any in the two communities once this becomes part of the code. And what we're kind of hearing in Woody Glen is that might not apply. Rancho Navarro, excuse me. And we're hearing in Rancho Navarro is that just might not fly because there are people that are cultivating there, and they have been cultivating for a while. What we're actually hearing is we're not certain. We really don't know that there's a possibility that that's going on.
Yeah. I don't know how. I mean, how is the county going to gauge? Who is the county to listen to? The county community sentiment in my neighborhood, is the county going to listen to permitted growers, only growers that have applied, or anybody who has a large house on their property? I mean, I don't really know what the answer to that is.
So through this process right now, we're going to get a kind of we're going to get people at our public outreach meetings, and then tell us what they think and what their opinions are of what we're doing and how they'd like to see this process move forward. Following all of that, if everything stays the same and we create this language that supports the opt-in areas, we'll, before the Board of Supervisors, we'll go before the Planning Commission and then ultimately before the Board of Supervisors. And at those meetings, the public will be there and they will comment. And, how the board responds, how the commission, how the board responds to the public comment received is something that, we don't predict. But, as elected officials, they should or probably will be responsive to what they believe is, the desire of whatever community is being affected, to try to minimize impacts or to enact land use control that benefit that community, that they support that, these new rules.
When the county already voted to move forward with an opt-out strategy, and so, they're supportive of it. I just don't know if people who don't live in Rancho Navarro could show up and oppose, an opt-out overlay for our subdivision.
So what typically happens when you do give comment at a public hearing, you give your address, say where you're from, and they can comment on the entire process. The way things are shaping up, let's say you're generally pro-cannabis and you want to see a loosening of restrictions for cultivation in the county, they're going to hear a lot of good things that night. Because, hopefully, it's Paul and I, it's our plan, our team's plan, to get these things all up all going at the same time. And so if you're sitting there, you're going to hear about the exceptions work you're doing. You're going to hear about these opt-in zones. And so if you start to hear, well, there's these well-defined communities and neighborhoods that are saying we'd just like to retain our residential community. We'd like, our residential identity. It feels like I don't imagine there to be that much opposition to that, because you guys have done a very good job of saying we're only concerned about commercial activity in our neighborhood because of it impacts the residential character of our neighborhood, and outside of that, we're not looking to any changes or impact any of the industry as a whole. And so I think that the real concern that we're faced with in your neighborhood is whether or not people in that neighborhood want this, want to be included in this effort.
I mean, I think there is a big group community who is very supportive of the things that Woodland and Deerwood and everybody else wants, and a prohibition. But if the county and the consultants telling us that your best way to deal with this is to find some consensus in your neighborhood through some limited cultivation crop, then that's what we're going to try for, I think, as a community. But if that's an option, then we're not going to. If that just makes things die on the vine and lead to a dead end, then we'll have to re-strategize, I guess.
Okay, hey Mark.
Well,
I think we need to work a little offline and get clear, because I think Kirk's been very clear about what he's hearing in his neighborhood, and the challenges. Honestly, they're challenges. Let's do a little thinking offline and involve some other players from our team, and let us get back to you directly, Kirk, so we can talk this through a little bit more.
Yeah, and if it sounds like there are going to be community meetings that are probably going to happen before June 30th. So if that's the case, we'd like to know when that potentially might happen.
You'll know.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, you'll know, and you'll even know what's going to be presented, and you'll be helping us present it.
Yeah, you'll help figure out the date.
Not getting out of that. Gentlemen, I really apologize, but I'm sorry. I need to backtrack on something, because as we've been talking with Kirk, it's clear that I think gave a pretty simplistic answer earlier, and it was an answer of nice clarity for me as a land use planner, but didn't really respect what's happening in the community. This relates to what does previous cultivation mean? Has there been commercial cultivation within your neighborhood? And what's becoming clear for Ray Navarro, the test is to have a permit from the county. It's a really easy answer, which is no. It's completely misleading about what many residents within Rancho Navarro are doing. And that's problematic. So I apologize, but I think we have to revisit this question of when we talk about was there existing cultivation, how is that defined? And I think my simplistic answer of well, they have a permit, that doesn't get to what we need to get to. I think we need to talk a little bit more about what it means. Was there prevalent cultivation within the neighborhood, and acknowledge that for years and years people were growing illegally, and for years they were growing under medical marijuana, which allowed up to 25 plants, and then more recently they've only just begun to grow under commercial permits. So I think this question was, is this a neighborhood that didn't have prevalent cultivation is a little more nuanced than just do they have a permit for commercial? Do you understand what I'm getting at?
I do, and for the area, the vast majority are not growers. The not growers. I'm sure that there are some that were.
it's going to be pretty easy in Woody Glen and Deerwood, but we're not writing regs for Woody Glen and Deerwood. We're probably as often as not writing regs that will apply to places like Rancho Navarro, which are not so clean and simple. So, Mark, I want to make sure we circle back and don't make the test for establishing, well, is there a history of cultivation, don't make it too simplistic or in any way misleading. So let's just talk line. You guys are going to get to see this draft again before it gets out. But I think, Mark, what's on us now is we need to work pretty quickly to incorporate changes as we've heard them today, get it back to this group, and I'd like to be getting this to Kate Cook for review next week. She'll be the first stop. We're going to go to our legal counsel before we even talk with county staff, because we want to take something forward to county staff that ultimately legal says that's not a good way to go. So our process is we want your opinion, then we go to the legal staff, then we take it to county, and if everybody's saying, yeah, this works, then we've got something that we can take public.
The final point on our agenda, I know that, Aaron, I think you had a little bit of changes to your tape over down there, your overlay for Woody Glen. Did you want to talk about that, or do you have any questions about it? Or?
Just a comment, and I'll take direction as you guys have it. We've got that interior green area, we've got the extended yellow area. We're getting more and more information that suggests that both those areas are very good for the opt-out. That being said, we also were last meeting to kind of look at any adjacent or adjoining parcels that may not fit cleanly but are in fact adjacent. That's kind of what I've been working on now, and I've got 3 or 4 or 5 at this point that would love to join in. So I'll flush it out so I can get it finalized and get it to you. Part of my reluctance has been not knowing kind of what the annex process looks like in the future, all those things, or what percentage. I'm reluctant to submit it until I understand a little more what criteria look like going forward, so that I'm not misleading anybody that may have an interest but is just kind of on the fence. Anyway.
Well, right now, if you've got anyone that is, right contiguous to your area, to your shape, certainly get them included in this process right now. As we've mentioned lots of times, we don't want to gerrymander. We don't want to have a string of parcels. But if you've got, say, neighboring parcels along that road, there's certainly a good argument to be made for them to be included, as well as to the southern part where your green parcels are, because you have that bridge. You have the constraint of that bridge. So if those parcels are in that area, I would say by all means include them now. Now, if they are wanting to see how this all plays out, yeah, we're going to be refining the language and what it would take to amend one of these overlay areas this week, and you'll get some more clarity on that by this time next week.
Wonderful. Okay, you guys. If I'm holding anything, please let me know, and we'll make a quick decision. But I think we're pretty darn close. Oh
yeah, we are. You're not holding up anything. And how about Deerwood? Deerwood is pretty well defined, and we've seen what we're going to go with there, right, guys?
A table on that map.
All right, fantastic. Anything else for the room? We go all the way through the agenda. Any overarching concerns or comments?
One, quite some guidance. Earlier today, we sent a three tentative petitions, and we are going to be having a neighborhood week meeting actually tomorrow, but there will be other opportunities to gather signatures. Ben, do you think you would be able to give us an idea of what a petition would look like? And if those are those satisfactory? Are you talking about parcels? Are you talking about parcels or deeded the land that is all encompassed one deed?
So first thing, I'll give a disclaimer. Fridays for our team are heavy meetings. So stuff you send us typically on Fridays, we won't get to see until either this evening or at some point this weekend. So that's a little disclaimer there. And then the second thing is we're still a little ways off from figuring out exactly what petitions would look like. You know, what shape they would specifically take. And then regarding whether they're going to be deeded parcels or assessor's parcels, I'm going to let Paul take that one.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think we're probably going to go with APMs because that's easier for the county to track. Even though it doesn't always reflect the underlying legal parcels, if we go there, it gets very challenging. So I think, you know, from our perspective, as far as validating, APMs are a lot easier. You can go to the assessor, and, you know, we can validate. Anything else is very, very hard for us to validate.
So if the ownership shows one name over several assessor parcel numbers, we would have to have this is a guess right now, and it's a work in process, I know, but that you would have a signature by each assessor parcel number, and regardless if they're all covered underneath one deed.
Yeah, you know, there's the term, we're getting into the weeds. We're getting into the ground microbes now. This is a very fine point. It's an important point, but we're going to have to really get the clerk involved and find out how they conduct whatever their standard practice on any of their assessment elections or anything like that. That's what we're just going to do. But I can't tell you right now what the county practice is, but we'll get that sorted out.
Oh, thank you.
It's great, guys. As fast as we can run, you guys are right next to us, if not running faster. And
Mark, they've been in
really
front of us this
that.
whole time. We've been playing catch up the whole time. So
yeah,
this is great.
We really appreciate that. It's very, very helpful.
Yep.
Okay, so we have. Go, Aaron.
Sorry, I was just going to say anything we can do to print out even farther ahead of you.
Jeez, guys.
We're just trying to help. We're trying to make you guys look good to make us look good.
I'm standing here, I got my hands on my knees and I'm wheezing, and you're asking me, how can you run faster?
Get on the treadmill before Chris.
Well, I don't think this will come as a surprise, but you are way ahead of the other two groups. So you're certainly not going to get left behind, which frankly I think was the concern of the Board of Supervisors, is that the opt-out would somehow slow up the process, and that clearly is not the issue yet. So.
We're going to revise that framework that you saw this week. We're going to revise it, you know, to reflect this conversation and the comments that we got back from you. I don't think we have to do any further work with our neighborhoods. We've got Yearwood well-defined, we have Rancho Navarro well-defined, and then we're just waiting on Aaron, your kind of final decision, or, you know, more defined shape there. And then we have to start having these conversations regarding these potentially partial opt-out zones, and then, you know, kind of start to have legal review what we've done so far. So we should have the revised framework out to you about the same time midweek next week for your review, and then we're looking at another Friday meeting. Does the same time work for everybody?
Yeah, it's working good.
Okay. What Mark is about to find out is that it may work for me. In fact, all of next week, Friday is pretty ugly, Mark, so you'll be running things on your own, and I know you're more than capable of.
I'm worried that after this thing about sprinting, they might gang up on me, Paul.
Hey, Paul, we want to know what you're doing Saturday. We can work Saturday, too.
Yeah, we work Saturday already, thank you.
I'll say 2 o'clock next Friday, and do you think we could possibly get out of the hour, or do you guys want to keep it at an hour and a half?
1 hour and 20 minutes, Dave, you think?
We're gonna be more concise on our issues with Rancho Navarro, because a lot of that discussion is gonna happen offline this week.
Right.
And so we'll probably just be focused on what changes we made to that draft framework, and answering any questions we have on the neighbor shapes, and then of course any procedural questions. So I think we could squeeze it at an hour next week.
Sounds
Okay.
Okay, we'll set it up for next Friday, 2 o'clock.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
I appreciate your forward wisdom and helping work on this process with us.
Agree. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right, talk to you next week.
Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.
You too.
Bye.
Errol and Evan.